The laughter and clinking of glasses echoed through the luxurious event hall, but Adrian couldn't focus on the festivities. His wife, Clara, was radiant tonight, more than usual. Her dark green dress hugged her in all the right places, and her smile lit up the room. Adrian should have been proud to call her his, but something gnawed at the edges of his mind. A sensation he couldn't name, but it left him restless. He had seen the way her eyes lingered on her boss, Victor Harrington, too often. Victor, with his impeccable suits, the easy charm of a man who always got his way, and the habit of making everyone around him feel like they existed for his amusement. Adrian couldn't deny his insecurity. Victor was everything he wasn't. But Clara had reassured him time and again. It's just work, she'd say, laughing off his concern. Victor's harmless. Tonight, Adrian wasn't so sure. Clara had disappeared into the crowd 20 minutes ago, claiming she needed another drink. When she didn't return, Adrian tried to brush it off. She was probably chatting with her colleagues, but the itch of unease grew unbearable. He began to search for her, moving through the throng of smiling faces, scanning for the emerald green of her dress. The festive energy of the room felt suffocating as he passed groups of colleagues deep in conversation. A flash of green caught his eye, and Adrian froze. Clara was in a secluded corner near the balcony doors. She wasn't alone. Victor was standing dangerously close to her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. They were laughing at something he said. Adrian clenched his fists, feeling his chest tighten. He told himself he was overreacting. Then, as if in slow motion, Victor leaned in and kissed her. Clara didn't pull away. Time stopped. Adrian's vision tunneled as his world collapsed in on itself. He had seen enough. The love of his life, the woman he had trusted with every part of himself, was kissing another man. And worse, it wasn't a fleeting, shocked moment. It was deliberate, as if they were lovers who had done this before. Clara Adrienne's voice thundered across the room before he could stop himself. Her head snapped toward him, her face draining of color. Victor stepped back with a smug, unapologetic expression on his face. Adrian and Clara started, her voice trembling, but Adrian didn't wait to hear what she had to say. He turned on his heel and walked out of the room, his heart pounding and his hands shaking. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't stay. Adrian's mind raced as he sped down the dimly lit streets. The winter chill seeped through his jacket, but he barely felt it. His chest heaved with every breath, a mix of anger, humiliation, and heartbreak swirling inside him. He had to remind himself to keep his eyes on the road. The last thing he needed was another disaster that night. Pulling into the driveway of their suburban home, Adrian sat in the car for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The image of Clara kissing Victor replayed in his mind like a haunting loop. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't need to look to know who it was, Clara. He ignored the call and got out of the car, slamming the door behind him. Inside the house, everything felt too quiet, too still. He dropped his keys on the kitchen counter and sank onto the couch, staring blankly at the wall. His thoughts were too loud, drowning out any attempt to think rationally. 15 minutes later, he heard the faint sound of tires on gravel. The front door creaked open, and Clara stepped in, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "Adrian," she called softly, her voice tentative. He didn't respond. She walked into the living room, her makeup smeared and her expression filled with guilt and desperation. "Please let me explain," she began, her voice trembling. Adrian finally looked at her, his jaw clenched. "Explain what, Clara? That you were kissing another man? That your harmless boss is more than just a colleague?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "It wasn't what it looked like," she said, but he interrupted, his voice cold and sharp. "Don't insult my intelligence by saying that. I saw you, I saw everything." Clara sank onto the armchair across from him, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know what happened. It was a mistake, he kissed me first. Adrian let out a bitter laugh. Really? That's your excuse? A kiss like that doesn't come out of nowhere, Clara. It was too familiar. She flinched at his words, fresh tears streaming down her face. It didn't mean anything. I swear. I love you, Adrian. Only you. Do you? He asked, his voice rising, because you didn't look like someone in love with me tonight. You look like someone who's been lying for a long time. Clara sobbed harder, her words barely audible. I didn't mean for it to happen, she said. I didn't. Adrian stood abruptly, pacing the room. How long has this been going on? He demanded, his voice thunderous. It hasn't, she cried. It was just a night. I promise. He stopped and turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. You're lying, he said. I'm not, Clara insisted, but Adrian wasn't buying it. Give me your phone, he said suddenly. What, your phone? Clara repeated, stepping closer. If you're telling the truth, then prove it. Show me your messages. Her hesitation was all the confirmation he needed. She shifted uncomfortably, clutching her hands together as though trying to shield herself. Adrian, please, she said. That's not fair. Fair? He barked out a laugh. Fair would be not having my wife sneak around with her boss. He demanded the phone again. Give me the damn phone. Tears blurred her vision as she reluctantly pulled her phone from her purse. She handed it over, and Adrian unlocked it with the password he still knew by heart. He immediately opened her messaging app and searched for Victor's name. What he found made his stomach churn. There were weeks of messages, some seemingly innocent, others blatantly flirtatious. Inside jokes, late-night chats, and subtle confessions filled the screen. Adrian's chest tightened as he scrolled further, finding messages that left no room for doubt. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. Don't forget our lunch plans tomorrow. You're incredible, Clara. I'm so lucky to have you. Adrian's hand trembled as he held the phone, his vision blurring with rage. He shoved the device back at her, his face a mask of cold fury. How could you? He snapped. I don't, she started, but he cut her off. Just don't. I trusted you, Clara. I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me. Clara broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. It wasn't supposed to go this far. I was going to end it. I swear. Adrian repeated, his voice dripping with sarcasm, after the next office party, or after he left his wife for you. Her silence spoke volumes. Adrian took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He couldn't stay in this room with her. You need to leave, he said, his voice firm. What? Clara looked up at him, her face streaked with tears. I can't do this right now. Pack a bag and go stay somewhere else. I need time to think, she said. Adrian, please go, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Clara hesitated for a moment before nodding, defeated. She stood and walked upstairs, her footsteps heavy. Adrian sat back down on the couch, staring at the phone she had left behind. The pain was unbearable, but beneath it, a new emotion began to rise, something cold, calculating, and unrelenting. Revenge. If Victor Harrington thought he could destroy Adrienne's life without consequences, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Adrian sat alone in the darkened living room, the silence broken only by the faint hum of a refrigerator in the kitchen. He stared at the messages on Clara's phone, his mind swirling with a dangerous mix of rage and resolve. Every word exchanged between her and Victor felt like a knife to his chest, but he forced himself to read through them again, dissecting every line. This wasn't just about the betrayal, this was about justice. Victor Harrington had built his reputation on charm and charisma, his public persona that of a visionary leader adored by his employees and respected by his peers. But behind closed doors, he was a manipulative predator, and Adrian wasn't about to let him walk away unscathed. He reached for his laptop, his fingers trembling as he powered it on. Adrian wasn't tech-savvy in the traditional sense, but he had enough knowledge to dig where it mattered. He started with Victor's social media profiles, poring over every post, every tag, photo, and interaction. It didn't take long to find breadcrumbs, clues that Victor had been playing this game with more than just Clara. There were comments from other female employees, some innocuous, others laced with a familiarity that made Adrian's skin crawl. He screenshot everything, cataloging it meticulously. Next, he turned his attention to Victor's professional record. A quick search of public databases revealed contracts, partnerships, and financial reports. Adrian's eyes narrowed as he spotted inconsistencies in Victor's company's expense reports. Trips labeled as business development lined up with photos of him lounging on beaches or dining at high-end restaurants. Victor was not only immoral, he was careless. By the time the sun began to rise, Adrian had compiled a dossier that painted a damning picture of Victor Harrington, man who used his position of power to exploit others, both professionally and personally. But this was only the beginning. Adrian wasn't interested in a quiet resolution, he wanted to make a statement. Later that morning, Adrian visited his best friend Nick, a journalist with a penchant for uncovering corruption. Nick was one of the few people Adrian trusted implicitly, and he knew this story needed a platform. Nick raised an eyebrow as Adrian walked into his apartment unannounced, a flash drive in hand. "You look like hell, man. What's going on?" Adrian sat down heavily on the couch, tossing the drive onto the coffee table. "I need your help." Nick picked up the drive, studying it curiously. "What's this?" Adrian replied, his tone grim. "Everything you need to ruin a man named Victor Harrington." Nick's eyes narrowed. "Victor Harrington? The co everyone's raving about?" Adrian nodded. "Yes, him. He's been having an affair with Clara." Nick's expression darkened. "That bastard." "It was worse than that," Adrian continued, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "He's using his position to manipulate women at his company. Clara is just one of them. There's evidence in there, messages, photos, financial records. I want the world to know who he really is." Nick hesitated. "This is big, Adrian. Are you sure you want to go public with this? Once it's out there, there's no going back." Adrian met his gaze, his eyes cold and unwavering. "I'm sure. This isn't just about me, it's about everyone he's hurt. He needs to be stopped." Nick nodded slowly, slipping the flash drive into his laptop. "All right, let me dig into this and see what I can do. But you need to prepare yourself, Adrian. This is going to get messy." Adrian gave a humorless laugh. "Messy? My life's already in ruins. Nick, what's a little more chaos?" The days that followed were a whirlwind of preparation. Nick began drafting an exposé that would not only reveal Victor's affair with Clara but also expose his pattern of exploitation and unethical behavior. Adrian worked behind the scenes, reaching out to former employees who might be willing to share their stories anonymously. Clara, oblivious to Adrian's plans, continued to text him, her messages growing increasingly desperate. "Adrian, please. I'm so sorry. Can we at least talk? I'll quit my job. I'll do whatever it takes, just don't give up on us." Adrian read the messages but didn't respond. He couldn't, not yet. His silence was eating at her, and he knew it, but his focus wasn't on Clara anymore. It was on Victor, the man who had shattered his marriage. A week later, the article went live. The headline was brutal: Victor Harrington, exposed the dark secrets of a corporate icon. Nick's article detailed everything: Victor's affair with Clara, the other women he had manipulated, and the suspicious financial activities that hinted at embezzlement. The piece was accompanied by screenshots of messages, photos, and testimonies from anonymous sources. It spread like wildfire. Victor's pristine reputation crumbled overnight. Social media was ablaze with outrage, and news outlets picked up the story, each one adding fuel to the fire. Victor was forced to issue a public statement denying the allegations, but the evidence was overwhelming. Adrian watched the fallout from the sidelines, a grim satisfaction settling in his chest. But he wasn't done yet. The second phase of Adrian's plan was more personal. He knew Victor prided himself on his spotless image, but Adrian wanted to hit him where it hurt the most, his ego. Victor had built his empire on charm, and Adrian was determined to dismantle it. He reached out to investors, board members, and key stakeholders in Victor's company, sharing the article and additional evidence privately. One by one, Victor's allies began to distance themselves, afraid of being associated with the scandal. By the time Victor realized what was happening, it was too late. His company's stock plummeted, and his board of directors convened an emergency meeting. 2 weeks later, Victor was forced to resign. Adrian smiled grimly as he read the headline, "Victor Harrington steps down amid scandal." Meanwhile, Clara tried to salvage what remained of her life. She had resigned from her position at Victor's company, unable to face the judgment of her colleagues. She reached out to Adrian again, pleading for a chance to fix their marriage. Adrian finally agreed to meet her, but his decision was already made. Sitting across from her in the same living room where their marriage had unraveled, Adrian spoke with a calmness that masked the storm within him. "Clara, I've thought long and hard about this, and I've realized something. I deserve better than the lies, the betrayal, and the pain you've caused me." Clara sobbed, her words tumbling out in desperation. "I know I hurt you, Adrian, but I love you. I'll do anything to make it right." He shook his head, standing to leave. "Sometimes love isn't enough, Clara. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine. Goodbye." As he walked out the door, Adrian felt an unexpected sense of peace for the first time in months. The weight of betrayal lifted from his shoulders. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was taking back control of his life. And as for Victor Harrington, Adrian knew the man would never recover. Adrian didn't stop to look back as he left Clara behind in the house that once felt like a home. The cold air of the late afternoon greeted him as he stepped onto the porch, slamming the door behind him, a symbolic closure of a chapter that had consumed him for too long. He didn't drive home immediately, instead, he found himself wandering through a nearby park. The quiet serenity of the place contrasted sharply with the storm raging inside him. For months, Adrian had been a victim of betrayal, drowning in heartbreak and anger. But now he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a strange, tentative sense of freedom. The revenge he had orchestrated against Victor was not just about exposing him, it was about reclaiming his power, reminding himself that he was not weak or disposable. Came with its own weight. Adrian spent the next few weeks piecing his life back together. He moved out of the house he had shared with Clara, unable to bear the ghosts that lingered in every corner. He found a modest apartment on the other side of town, a fresh start in a space that was entirely his own. The first few nights were strange, the silence almost deafening, but slowly, the emptiness began to feel like an opportunity rather than a punishment. Clara's messages slowed to a trickle and eventually stopped altogether. Adrian imagined she had finally accepted the reality of their separation. Still, he couldn't shake the image of her tear-streaked face as she begged him to give their marriage another chance. A part of him, a small, stubborn part, still clung to the love they had once shared, but it was a love built on illusions, and Adrian knew he deserved something real. Victor Harrington's downfall continued to snowball weeks after he resigned from his company. The financial discrepancies Adrian had uncovered became the subject of a federal investigation. News outlets reported on allegations of fraud, misuse of company funds, and ethical violations. Victor's name became synonymous with scandal, his once admired legacy reduced to ashes. Adrian followed the news with a mixture of satisfaction and detachment. He had set the wheels in motion, but the machine of public accountability had taken over. Victor was finished, and Adrian no longer needed to concern himself with the man. Instead, Adrian turned his attention inward. Therapy became a cornerstone of his healing process. At first, he resisted the idea, dismissing it as unnecessary, but a close friend, Maya, convinced him to give it a try. "Adrian," she said during one of their conversations over coffee, "you've been through hell. You can't carry all of this on your own. It's okay to ask for help." He reluctantly agreed, and though the first few sessions were uncomfortable, he began to see the value in unpacking his pain. His therapist, Dr. Patel, had a calm and reassuring presence. Her questions cut through the fog in his mind like a beacon. "Tell me about the anger," she said during one session. Her tone was gentle but firm. "You've mentioned it often, but where do you think it truly comes from?" Adrian hesitated, his hands fidgeting with the edge of the couch cushion. "I guess I feel like I wasn't enough for Clara, for our marriage, and Victor just swooped in and took everything I thought was mine. It's infuriating." Dr. Patel nodded. "It sounds like you've tied a lot of your self-worth to your role as a husband. But Adrian, let me ask you this, if Clara hadn't betrayed you, would you have felt whole, or were there cracks in the foundation even before that?" The question hit him like a freight train. He had always blamed Clara and Victor for his unhappiness, but now he realized there was truth to what Dr. Patel was saying. He had spent so much of his life pouring himself into his marriage, making Clara's happiness his priority, that he had neglected his own needs, his own identity. The realization was painful but necessary. Months passed, and Adrian began to rediscover himself. He threw himself into hobbies he had long abandoned, photography, hiking, even cooking. He reconnected with old friends, building a support network that reminded him he wasn't alone. One evening, as he stood on a hill overlooking the city skyline, camera in hand, he felt a rare sense of contentment. The pain of the past still lingered, but it no longer defined him. He had survived. Then one day, life surprised him. Adrian met Sophie at a local charity event organized by a friend. She was warm, intelligent, and refreshingly direct, a stark contrast to the guarded world he had inhabited for so long. They started talking over drinks, their conversation flowing effortlessly. Sophie worked as an architect, her passion for design evident in the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about her projects. Adrian found himself captivated, not just by her beauty, but by her authenticity. She was unpretentious, unapologetically herself, and it was a breath of fresh air. Over the next few weeks, they exchanged messages, met for coffee, and gradually grew closer. Adrian was cautious, afraid of repeating the mistakes of the past, but Sophie's honesty and kindness slowly chipped away at his walls. One evening, as they walked through the park where Adrian often found solace, Sophie stopped and turned to him, her expression serious. "You're holding back," she said softly. "I can tell you've been hurt, Adrian, but if this is going to go anywhere, I need you to trust me." Adrian hesitated, his heart pounding. He had spent so much time guarding himself, afraid of being vulnerable again. But as he looked into Sophie's eyes, he realized she wasn't asking for perfection, she was asking for honesty. So, he told her everything, the betrayal, the revenge, the pain that had nearly consumed him. Instead of recoiling, Sophie listened. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances, she simply stood by him, her presence a quiet comfort. Adrian didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he was hopeful. He had learned that life wasn't about avoiding pain but about finding the strength to rise after being broken. And as he walked hand in hand with Sophie, he realized that perhaps love wasn't about perfection or fairy tales, it was about choosing to show up, scars and all, and daring to hope again.